Hi, I'm Rick Richardson. Welcome back to the Salary Step Up. This is step 11, and in this step we're going to be talking about communication. Now, communication is an extremely broad subject, and it's actually spread throughout the series. But in this step, I want to focus on a few details of it that are more particular to really think about communication and how you're going to use it to your advantage. All right, so let me give you a couple of items we're going to discuss here. We're going to talk about gathering information, directing conversations, educate others, control the conversations, and deliver clear information. So the first part I want to talk about is I want you to think about communication as a skill. We communicate all the time, and you've probably heard that most communication is nonverbal. So your body language is a big part of it. The way that you emphasize words, the way that you put your demeanor into your conversation, how you carry yourself, and the same comes back to you. But if you think about communication as a skill and you can develop it, you can become better at it, and you can become better in both delivering your information and then receiving the information. So let me give you a couple of examples of this. First example is I want you to think about when you're communicating that you use a very well-crafted series of questions, giving it some thought, making sure that what you're going to say to the other person, how you're going to say it, and that you want to elicit information. You got to think about what information do you want to gather, and then how can you craft questions and topical conversation to draw out that information and gather the information that's important to you. This may sound a little clinical, but if you give it the thought in advance, prior to engaging in a conversation with someone, you can have that conversation run very fluid, very smoothly, because you only have to remember the few things that you had thought of in advance that you want to ask them and the focus of the conversation. So that leads me to another aspect of it, that you want to control the conversation. Now, when you're controlling a conversation, it's not a matter of using an iron fist, so to speak, and only talking about the one thing that you want to talk about. It's more about thinking about that the conversation, the focus of the conversation is at the center, and the conversation is swirling around the topic that you've chosen. And it's your job to continue to close in on that center. And if somebody wants to divert a little bit, that's okay, but you'll bring them back to it. And so you're always having a very clear focus in your mind of what you want to draw them closer and closer to. And if you've thought this out in advance, you can have multiple ways of approaching that focus. And if you continue to draw them towards that as you're circling around it, you'll be maintaining control of that conversation. Another aspect of the conversation is to not just in delivering the information and receiving the information, but to discover their motivations and their intent and their interests. So while you're communicating with them, you want to be very focused on understanding where they're coming from, what words are they choosing, how are they delivering the information to you. Are they more agitated about certain things? Are they very comfortable about others? How they're communicating will tell you about what motivates them and where they're coming from, where their desires are. So if you can discover their desires and their motivations in your communication, that will give you information to further the communication with them, but also when you get further on into asking for favors, things like that, you will understand where their hot spots are that you can either avoid problem areas or ask in certain ways that you know will relate best to them. Another thing I want you to do is to sway their opinion. Now, we'll talk more about this in building rapport and influencing the other parties, but when I'm saying you want to sway their opinion, one thing I want you to use when you're communicating is to ask a question that is open-ended that will lead them to your opinion. So if you were to ask a question that causes them to have to think in a particular way, you will be able to lead them to a opinion that is similar to yours or the same as yours. So we'll get into that more in influencing and rapport building, but think about it from the standpoint of, if you ask open-ended questions, a question that does not have a yes or a no, it's one that they have to elaborate on. But you can also ask the question, and then as they're thinking about it, you can tell them, oh, that's okay, we can talk about it more later, or you don't have to give me an answer right now, or something like that, which will actually cause them to ponder it. It also allows you to come back to it later on. The more times you can come back to it, the more influence you can have on their thinking of that particular situation. A big part of communication is understanding what's being communicated. So it's my opinion that the person that has the control of the conversation, that has the intent in the conversation, that it's their job to understand what the other party is saying, but also making sure that the other party understands what you're saying. So if you're going to go into a conversation with a very clear intent to sway the other party, to gather information, to influence the other person, all of those different things that we want to do, you need to be very clear on making sure that when you are talking to them, you're being very clear and using very clear language to make sure that they understand what you're saying. Likewise, when they talk to you, you need to make sure that you're saying that you're understanding what that is. So let me give you an example of clarifying would be to say to the person, if I understand you correctly, you're saying this. Now, if that's true, they'll say, yes, exactly, that's what I'm saying. Or if it's not quite right, they can reiterate what they said or pick different language. Another example of that is to say, I think I understand what you're saying, but can you say it a different way? Or can you use a couple different words? Or I'm not really quite sure exactly where you're going with this. Can you say it again? And a lot of times if you ask people to repeat it, they'll choose different words to elaborate on it. And when they do that, you will be able to drill down a little deeper to get to what they're really trying to convey. So let me talk a little bit about another way that people will convey information, and that's through body language. Now, body language is huge. It's a big part of how we communicate. And I think that everybody has a basic understanding of body language, but we want to be very clear to focus on viewing the body language while the person's communicating and while you're communicating to them. If what you're saying to the other party is causing them to recoil a little bit or tighten up, then you want to make sure that you're understanding that while you're communicating, and you might want to back off a little bit. Or maybe that's your intended result and you want to keep pushing them to push their hot button. So you'll notice that I'm not referring to the other party as your boss. And that's for a very clear, specific reason on my part, which is I want you to think about your communication with everybody that you interact with. All of your coworkers, including your boss, and look at how you interact with them and what they tell you and what you can gather. It's amazing to me how much information I'm able to gather even when I'm a guest in someone's business and I'm visiting and I ask the right questions. I end up having them tell me about projected sales, about what their production's been like, about problem areas. Within a few hours of visiting someone's facility, oftentimes I have a pretty good grasp of how well it's running and what's going on, if I'm able to talk to everybody. And I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking to the people that are doing the maintenance, the people that are secretaries and assistants and facilities managers. It's amazing how much these people know that they may not even be aware of. But if you're crafting your questions correctly and then watching the give and take, you can get a lot of information. So consider the body language while you're talking to people. Now, one technique that I feel is the most important in communication is active listening. Now, my definition of active listening: ask a well-crafted question, then shut up. Here's the thing. Most people, when they feel that they need to control a conversation, they feel that they have to just keep moving the conversation along and they keep talking, like they're dictating information. It's best if you craft a question that leads the person to discuss what you want to discuss, then shut up and let them tell you what you need to know. They're going to tell you things verbally and non-verbally. You need to be keeping your mouth closed and your eyes wide open and really listening to what they say. Now, when you're active listening, you want to make sure you're doing a little bit of head bobbing and that you're mirroring their physical reactions. If they're seeming uncomfortable, you can be a little, express a little empathy, but make sure that you're just confirming that you're listening to them. A little bit of a every once in a while goes a long way. If you keep engaging them with those little non-verbals and the head bobs and stuff like that, you're going to find that they want to keep telling you things and they'll keep expressing it to you. When you are listening and you're watching their body language and you're really paying attention to their choice of words, the look on their face, all of those things, it's amazing how much information the person is going to give you. That technique, that active listening technique, is one that has opened a lot of doors for me and has given me the insight to know how best to talk to the other party. Okay, so I want to go back to one item or a couple of items that I want to make sure you're really clear on. Is that you want to be specific in who you're wanting to engage with in the conversations and what that information is that you want to gather. You won't necessarily know exactly what you want to know, but you'll know what direction you want to head in. And as you gather more information, you can craft more questions that will help you get to the final goal, the nuggets that you want to find that are going to give you the best information to use in whatever your pursuit is. In this case, it happens to be trying to get your salary increased. But this works in everything. And this is one skill that I feel that everybody needs to really think about and really develop. That communication skill will help you in every relationship that you ever have. So give this a lot of thought. Write down any questions and anything that you feel that will be of advantage to you, and anything that you don't know. What don't you know, and who might have that answer for you? All right. So thank you for listening. This is the Salary Step Up. I'm Rick Richardson. Look forward to seeing you on the next step. Thanks.